All right, welcome back to Calculated Risk, here brought to you by SaturdayGlory.com. I am Tyler Shoemaker. You can find me at T-Shoe Index. He is Kelley Ford. You can find him at K Ford Ratings. And Kelley, we got to watch actual football yesterday. I didn't leave my recliner. I was tweeting about how out of shape I'm about to get, but it's all good because we got to watch some football, and New Mexico State was there also.
It was awesome, Tyler. I had so much fun. Didn't start until 2:30 Eastern, which, of course, starting next week, we'll get into it right at noon, but it was good. I was able to get some things done in the morning before college football kicked off, and then once that came, it was well past midnight on the East Coast when it all wrapped up. I was tweeting various things throughout as well, but yeah, man, it just felt good to be back. I don't even care how the teams looked. I know we're going to get into today some takeaways, but I don't even care that some looked really bad. Others did look pretty good. So I'm not going to draw too many conclusions from week 0, but as we talked about before, that's game 1 of 12 for most of those teams. Hawaii and Mexico State have 13, but that's game 1 of 12. It counts just as much as any other, and we've got to take away things from it, and I know we're going to get into that tonight.
Yeah, it's always interesting. We do all this work in the off season to come up with these preseason projections and to be able to kind of compare those with actual data and get some in-season numbers to crunch. It's fun. I love the process. So with that, we're going to start off with teams that, jumped up after week 0 in your ratings and in mine. If you're watching on YouTube here, we've got the graphics as always. So let's start with UMass. I think UMass was probably, at least in my opinion, one of the bigger stories of Saturday, where I projected them to lose by 2 touchdowns. The spread closed at 7, and they just came out and they led the whole game. I mean, I think New Mexico State tied it briefly, but Tyson Fomachan looked really good at quarterback, former Clemson quarterback for UMass, and they jumped up a full touchdown here in my ratings. What did you see from them, and then who are some other teams that really moved up in your ratings?
Yeah, UMass for sure was a surprise team for me. They're up 2.1 football points per game in my numbers from last week to this week. And yeah, I had projected UMass to be about a 9-point underdog in the game at New Mexico State. They certainly looked good on their way to that victory, and it was not a fluky victory. They were the better team in that game. Now, again, New Mexico State is not a world beater by any means. I think you made a joke as we opened. There was college football and then New Mexico State as well. So it's not, they're not going to get, a ton of credit in a resume ranking or even excuse me, sorry about that. Something's going on in my headphones. Even in a power rating, they're not going to get a ton of credit, but they're still going to get some, because when you expect you to be the worst team in college football, approximately, 20 some points below FBS average, you come out and then beat fairly soundly a team in the FBS level on the road that you were not projected to do that to. You outperformed your expectation from the model, so you are going to increase there. So UMass, to me, definitely a team. They were my number 2 biggest mover this week. They still didn't move up out of the bottom spot of FBS. I would expect that they might have a chance to do that after week 1. There's just some wackiness in week 0. I'm going to probably talk more about that as we get going here tonight. But because of some of that and because of how everything's still kind of calibrating, they're still number 133 out of 133 for me. They probably will not be there for much longer, especially if they play the way they did on Saturday moving forward.
Yeah, and this is a kind of a good example, I think, of something we've talked about before, where you tend to slowly phase out your preseason projections, whereas I think I'm a little bit more aggressive than you are on that, which is why we have such a discrepancy here, where UMass, you moved up for both of us, but just more drastically in my numbers, which makes sense given our philosophies that we've talked about. Just last thing here on UMass. The funny thing is, I projected them on the season to average about 19.5 points a game, and then they come out of the gate and score 41. That is insane. So that sort of thing is why they had such a big jump for me here already. Looking at your graph here, Notre Dame was your biggest mover. I think everyone was probably impressed with them, and everyone also probably came away from that game thinking Navy's not very good.
Yeah, that was definitely the two takeaways. Notre Dame was impressive. Again, yeah, up 2.2 points for me, football points per game, based on where they were last week coming into now this week. They were number 12 in my power ratings last week. They're now number 10. So, I mean, that's a decent move, especially when you're talking a week 0 game against an opponent that my numbers project you to beat by 22. The spread was 20 and a half, I think, somewhere around there. So Notre Dame, we talked about performing above the level the model expected. UMass, certainly. Notre Dame, for me, did that more so than anybody else. And that was a thorough domination. I mean, we got into garbage time in this game relatively quickly. I mean, I think Brian Fremeau even tweeted like, this is tied for the least or second least number of actually quality possessions, game possessions before getting into garbage time, like in his data set going back to 2007. So Notre Dame got up big early and they stayed up big throughout, obviously on their way to a 42-3 victory. I was impressed by Notre Dame. Notre Dame's going to be a big potential disrupting team this year. They are a CFP contender by my numbers. You know, they're in the top 15% chance to make the CFP, one of the greatest 15% chances. And they play 3 other contenders. They play Ohio State at home in week 4. They play USC at home in week 7, and they go on the road to Clemson in week 10. So Notre Dame is a team we're going to be talking about quite a bit, I think, this year. This was a very good first showing for them. Sam Hartman in that offense certainly looks like he's a good fit. Again, that that Navy defense is not great. But put up 42 points and to get into garbage time when they did, I was impressed by Notre Dame.
Yeah, same. I'll echo everything you said there. We're actually a little bit more aligned here. Notre Dame moved up about 2 points in my ratings as well, which puts them now in my top 10. They're number 10 in my ratings now after that performance. So they looked great, start to finish. FIU is a team that I see they barely moved up for you. I mean, they moved up a few points for me. That's the team I have dead last, and that I had dead last coming into this. I projected them to get waxed by Louisiana Tech, and then they came out and scored the opening touchdown and led most of the game until Louisiana Tech had a late comeback and ended up winning that game by 5. I'm curious if that's more of a reflection on FIU. The numbers seem to think so because as we were talking here before we recorded, Louisiana Tech actually, despite sneaking out a victory against one of the worst teams in the country, actually moved up a point in my ratings. Now they're still very lowly rated, of course, but actually moved up a point in their power rating. But FIU moved up 4 points in their power rating for me. So what did you think about what that game? What do the numbers look like on FIU for you?
Yeah, to be honest, Tyler, and I think we're as we talked about before, I think we're in a disagreement here just a little bit with regard to Louisiana Tech in particular. FIU, for me, the number 132 team in the country, so only better than UMass coming into last week, and now it remains that way. UMass did make up some ground, though, as you can see on the screen, 2.1 points up, FIU up 0.2. So FIU really, despite, having a chance to win at the end and really making it a competitive game, they didn't, from a statistical standpoint, play too much better than my model projected them to. Louisiana Tech played much worse. And I'll get to that when we get into our biggest fallers of the week. Right now we're on who's improving. We'll get to who is not. So to me, this game was more about Louisiana Tech not living up to the model's expectations and really playing pretty poorly. I know they scraped out the win at the end. And in a resume ranking, my most deserving rankings, they're going to get credit for that win. Now they beat a not great opponent at home by a point. So you're not going to get a ton there, or by 5 points, excuse me. So you're not going to get a ton there, but they're going to get more credit in a resume ranking than they're going to get in a power rating system here. So yeah, for me, this game really not much learned about FIU, but Louisiana Tech probably a little bit worse than I thought.
Yeah, I like my just analytical eye test or whatever tells me that you're right. Like I said, I was surprised, when I ran the numbers and Louisiana Tech actually moved up just a touch. I've actually already bet against them here coming up for week 1. We'll talk about that later this week, but they play SMU this week and that line's under 21. And I just I don't think Louisiana Tech is quite what I thought they were going to be. So curious to see, how their season kind of unfolds here. Anybody else that you want to touch on? I know looks like Hawaii made a pretty decent jump for you. Jacksonville State made a decent jump for me after they won at home against UTEP in a game they maybe should have lost. UTEP kind of fumbled the game there at the end, I think. But anything else as far as risers this week before we get into teams that fell in the ratings?
No, I'll just recap, Tyler, for those that are listening and not able to see the graphic. So the teams that rose for me, again, this is only teams that played in week 0. Those teams would be Notre Dame. They rose by 2.2 football points per game. UMass 2.1. Hawaii 1.4. Jacksonville State 0.9, as we continue to try to figure out what they're all about as they transition from FCS. USC up 0.3 points per game. San Diego State up 0.3. FIU 0.2. And Ohio up 0.1. So those are the teams that rose for me, Tyler. But yeah, that summarizes the improvements that we've seen from week 0.
Yep, I am in agreement. Also, one last little note: looks like we're pretty much aligned on San Diego State. Either they're not on my graphic, but I did have them as a slight jump there. All right, so let's talk about who underwhelms. Again, we touched on Louisiana Tech as your biggest faller of the week. Mine was Navy. I think pretty self-explanatory. They got killed. I mean, I projected them to lose by 26. Which was way higher than the closing line was, and they still underachieved compared to that. So they fell pretty far for me. New Mexico State, we both are in the same neighborhood there, around between 2 and 3 points there. Anyone else you want to touch on? I think Vanderbilt is interesting. Looks like they dropped a decent amount for you. Any notes you want to add on Vanderbilt or any of those other teams?
Yeah, so Louisiana Tech, my biggest downgrader here, as you can see, 3.2 points. They actually fell 12 spots in the rankings. Some of that is to do with Louisiana Tech not performing up to the model's expectation. Others is some week 0 wackiness, which will level out as we get more games into the data set for 2023 season. Mexico State down 2.7, as you said. Your biggest follower was Navy. They're my third, down 2.1. Vanderbilt for me comes in next, 1.4. So I liked Vanderbilt by 15 points. And it almost felt like there were times in that game where maybe Vanderbilt could, pull away. They never did. And so they win the game by 7 at home against Hawaii, and what ended up being a really fun game late, one of the late ones, as we had some weather delay the kickoff of that game. So for me, Vanderbilt, despite the win, is down. Not a ton. They're down 6 spots in the rankings. They're down 1.4 points per game. Just wasn't quite what I was expecting from Vanderbilt. And and this doesn't necessarily play in, but we're human, so we think back to like what they did in this game last year, and maybe it speaks more to Hawaii being slightly better this year than they were last year. But I just really expected Vanderbilt. Not again. I had my 15 points. I wasn't expecting them to just throttle Hawaii like they did a year ago, but I really was expecting them, at home, opening game of the year, a team that you've beaten pretty badly last year. I really thought that they'd be able to kind of get a convincing win. And when you look at the stats from the game, it just didn't play out that way for Vanderbilt. And so this is already the team that, they're kind of in a league of their own within the SEC at the basement there. I'm looking down the rest of their schedule. I'm going to favor them in week 1 against Alabama A&M. I'm going to favor them in week 3 against UNLV. Wins could be tough to come by. I know they got to 5 last year. I'm not encouraged by what I saw based on week 0 results here and performance to think that Vanderbilt's going to be able to match or really even get close to where they were last year in terms of that win total.
Yeah, I'm with you. That's a team that I looked at their season win total under before the season, didn't pull the trigger, and Saturday kind of tells me I maybe should have. But that's really it. I mean, San Jose State, slight drop for me, slight drop for you. UTEP was another team for me that, despite losing, actually increased their rating just because the team they played increased by more. So I guess the model gave more credit for the win than downgrade for the loss. So it's just interesting how those things kind of play themselves out over the season. That's it for me on fallers. Any last notes there for you?
No, I'll just recap again for those listening. Louisiana Tech down the most this week for me, down 3.2 points per game. New Mexico State down 2.7. Navy 2.1. Vanderbilt down 1.4. UTEP 0.5. And San Jose State down 0.1 points based on that game against USC. So as we get going, Tyler, and this is probably intuitive for anyone listening, but as we get going, these things will really level out and it'll be much more cohesive. When you only have 7 games, I think we had at the FBS versus FBS level this past weekend, it can make for some, I call them week 0 wackiness and in the numbers. it will flatten out. It will level out. It will make more sense once everyone kind of gets a game under their belt, and many of these teams playing their second game this week. So all of that to say, when we do these recaps moving forward, there'll be a little bit more meat on the bones from my point of view, at least with my numbers. It's really hard to draw too many conclusions from a week 0, just given the nature of the new data that we have. But again, like I said, this is one of 12 games for most of these teams. It's going to count just as much at the end of the year as any of these others. So we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about it. Just letting you know, in moving forward, have a little bit more here once we get a little bit more interconnectivity of in-season data.
Yep. No, well said. And we'll use that as a segue kind of into our last segment here of just kind of our general takeaways, things to look for. And one of my general takeaways just from like my numbers standpoint is it does seem, at least here early on with very few data points, that my model is going to kind of reward teams for better performances than teams getting penalized. Maybe like UTEP, for instance, really comes to mind. Is like I said, I thought they maybe should have won that game, and the model kind of bore that out, that they lost by 3 on the road, but still rose in their power rating rose, and they rose in the rankings. So those type of things are interesting to me. And again, a reason that I like to do these numbers, because it's fun to run the numbers, see if what comes out matches the eye test. So it's a fun exercise for me. And like I told you, I was up till 1:00 Saturday night working on it and screwed it all up, but I enjoy every minute of it.
No, it's so much fun. And yeah, it's not much to add from a takeaway perspective from what you said. I agree with it. I gave a little bit in the last part there. Takeaway for me from a data standpoint is, yeah, we're working through the kinks of week 0 and week 1. And I spent much of Sunday figuring out where things aren't looking right, and then kind of debugging and figuring out why. But as I'm sure I'll have more of that in week 1, but I feel much better going to bed Sunday night here than I did when I woke up Sunday morning, getting ready to look at the results of all the simulations overnight that were running overnight. So yeah, we're getting there. College football is here. We're going to have a learning curve like we do every season here at the beginning, but it's all going to be worth it. And it's going to be so much fun talking a full slate of week 1 games the next time that we get back together. Cannot wait for it, Tyler.
Yep. It's going to be great. So again, you're listening to this on Monday. That'll be our regular cadence. We'll be back on Thursday with our look ahead to week 1, the first full slate of games. All the big teams are playing: Ohio State, Michigan, Georgia. Everybody's on the slate this week, so it's going to be fun. I'm looking forward to seeing what the numbers say, getting into it with you, and looking ahead and spending another Saturday in the recliner.
Let's do it, man! Cannot wait. The first of many. Let's go.
Yep, let's go. All right. Well, we will talk to you guys next time. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at TShoeIndex, at K Ford Ratings. For Kelley Ford, I'm Tyler Shoemaker. Thanks for listening to Calculated Risk.